The boundary toxic people hate most is the one that gives them nothing to work with. Not your anger, not your explanations, not your tears, but your refusal to keep engaging. That is the boundary they struggle to twist because silence leaves them nothing solid to grab. You know the pattern, a warm moment followed by something cold, sharp, confusing, and cruel. Then suddenly you are defending your tone instead of the disrespect that started everything. You leave conversations replaying every word, wondering how your pain became the case against you. That confusion is not random, and it does not mean you are overly sensitive. It usually means someone benefits when your attention shifts away from what they actually did. Most people think stronger boundaries mean better arguments, better evidence, and better emotional control. But toxic people often hear explanations as invitations because every detail gives them fresh material. The deeper truth is brutal. They can debate your reasons, but they struggle with your exit. The boundary is simple. When disrespect starts, access to you starts ending. Not forever in every situation, but immediately in that moment, in that exchange, with that behavior. That means fewer words, less defending, less explaining, and a faster emotional shutdown. You are not begging to be understood by someone actively profiting from misunderstanding you. Think about the toxic friend who goes cold after you finally say no once. They do not discuss the request. They suddenly question your loyalty, your energy, your character. Or the partner who insults you then acts wounded because your reaction felt disrespectful. Or the coworker who smiles publicly, then privately implies you are difficult and hard to trust. Different settings, same move, they create the injury, then manage your response like evidence. If they can keep you explaining, they can keep you emotionally available to manipulation. That is why your best boundary is not a perfect speech, but controlled withdrawal. You stop feeding the part of them that feeds on friction, confusion, and courtroom energy. This matters because toxic people are often strongest when you still hope honesty will fix them. They read that hope like an unlocked door and they walk through it repeatedly. So the first practical shift is this: stop trying to clear up deliberate confusion. Some confusion is innocent, but repeated confusion after clear words usually serves somebody. And when it serves them, your extra explanation becomes a gift, not a solution. You have probably felt this. The more carefully you explain, the less human you feel. That is because you are no longer speaking to connect, you are speaking to survive. And survival mode makes you easy to steer, easy to provoke, and easy to exhaust. When the disrespect begins, you stop discussing the meaning of your own reality. You do not convince, correct, chase, defend, decode, or beg for reasonable treatment. You name what happened once, then reduce access if the behavior continues. That might mean ending the call, leaving the room, delaying replies, or changing contact. It might mean saying, "I am not continuing this conversation," and then actually stopping. Notice what makes this powerful. It does not depend on their agreement. A manipulator can twist your words, but twisting your absence takes much more work. What they cannot easily do is force you to keep participating in your own distortion. That is the difference between a verbal boundary and an access boundary. A verbal boundary says, "Please stop speaking to me like that right now." An access boundary says, "If you continue, this conversation loses access to me." One asks for better behavior while the other responds to behavior already revealed. That distinction matters because toxic people often perform understanding without actually changing anything. They say they did not mean it while repeating the exact pattern tomorrow. They say you matter while punishing you every time you act like you matter. And if you only use words, they stay inside words where they are strongest. But once your boundary affects access, timing, attention, and availability, the game changes. Now they cannot keep harvesting your reactions on demand whenever they feel threatened or jealous. Now they cannot keep resetting the argument until you forget the original wound. Now they must face a consequence that does not require your emotional permission. This is where many people get scared because silence feels weak when you were trained to explain. Especially if you grew up around guilt, explosive moods, or punishment for having needs. You may have learned that calm self-protection looks rude, while over-explaining looks loving. But over-explaining is often fear wearing polite clothes, hoping reason will prevent another emotional attack. And toxic people can smell that hope almost instantly, then use it to keep control. They hear your long message and realize you still care about being fair to them. They watch you defend yourself and realize you still accept their version as important. They see urgency in your eyes and know they still have access to your nervous system. That is why the quieter boundary is so powerful. It protects your center first. You are no longer trying to win inside a rigged emotional courtroom. You are stepping out before their confusion becomes your atmosphere, your language, and your identity. And that protects more than the conversation, it protects your relationship with yourself. Because the real damage from toxic people is not only what they say. It is the slow pressure to betray your own perception just to keep peace. It is the habit of checking their face before trusting your own feelings. It is learning to treat your clarity like a crime scene that needs defending. And once that happens, even ordinary interactions start feeling strangely dangerous and emotionally expensive. A simple text feels loaded because you expect hidden punishment behind ordinary words. A delayed reply feels personal because mixed signals trained your body to brace. Even kindness can make you nervous because kindness was once used as bait. So if you want your peace back, you need a boundary that protects perception. And the strongest one is this: I do not keep talking after disrespect. Read that again in your mind because it sounds basic and changes everything. Not I do not like disrespect, not I hope you understand me, not please stop. I do not keep talking after disrespect, and that decision does not need defending. That boundary works because it is behavioral, not emotional, and behavior is harder to spin. They can mock your feelings, but they cannot force your continued participation. They can challenge your interpretation, but they cannot honestly misunderstand your absence for long. And if they do misunderstand it, that misunderstanding becomes useful information, not your emergency. Because healthy people respond to access boundaries with reflection, accountability, and change behavior, not escalation. Toxic people respond with pressure, guilt, theater, or a sudden emergency designed to pull you back. That reaction tells you more about their motives than their earlier words ever could. Here is the part many people miss: the boundary is not for persuading them. It is for ending the conditions where your mind gets bent out of shape. That means you do not measure success by whether they finally admit the truth. You measure success by whether you stayed aligned with yourself and reduced access quickly. That is the power shift. You stop negotiating for dignity and start enforcing conditions. Now let us make this uncomfortably real, because this is where most viewers freeze. You set the boundary, and suddenly they act shocked by your distance. They say you are punishing them, abandoning them, overreacting, or being impossible. Listen carefully. They are trying to turn your limit into the crime. That is how control survives after disrespect gets exposed and can no longer hide itself. When they cannot defend the behavior, they attack the consequence and try making it look cruel. That is why you must expect pushback before you decide your boundary failed. Pushback is often proof that the limit landed exactly where their entitlement lies. And this is where most people accidentally hand the power back through panic and explanation. They start clarifying the boundary, softening the boundary, apologizing for the boundary. They say, "That is not what I meant, I just needed a little space." Or they send a 5-paragraph message proving they are actually very caring. But the second you over-explain the limit, you reopen the door the limit closed. You move from consequence back into debate, and debate is their favorite terrain. So here is the practical rule: state less, do more, repeat nothing. One clear sentence is enough for someone who already heard the first one. After that, your consistency becomes the message, and consistency always speaks louder than explanations. For example, if a parent uses guilt after every boundary, shorten the conversation immediately. If a partner twists your words, stop proving your intent and end the exchange. If a friend only returns when they need something, stop rewarding the pattern with instant warmth. If a coworker keeps baiting you privately, make communication shorter, calmer, and more documented. Notice the theme: you stop offering your nervous system as a public resource. That does not make you cruel, it makes you no longer convenient to misuse. And people who depended on easy access will often call that cruelty. Do not let their discomfort rename your self-respect, especially when the old pattern benefited them. The healthiest boundaries often feel unfair to people who felt entitled to your softness. And that is another reason silence works better than arguments when someone feeds on emotional openings. Arguments invite performance, but reduced access reveals character very quickly when there is nothing left to manage. Someone sincere eventually asks what happened and shows change without demanding instant trust. Someone toxic rushes past repair and tries to regain their old position first. They miss your access more than they miss your pain, and that difference matters. Now let us talk about the sentence that often protects this boundary best. I am not discussing this further because repeating myself would only reward the disrespect. Short, calm, unadorned, and difficult to pull apart without looking obvious, controlling, or desperate. You can also say, I heard you and my decision stands exactly where I left it. Or say, you can feel however you feel, but this conversation is over. The words matter less than the posture behind them, because posture tells people what is real. No trembling debate, no rushed essay, no last-minute audition for basic respect. Your calm exit is the boundary, and your consistency is the walk. This does not mean becoming cold with everyone or avoiding difficult conversations altogether. Healthy relationships can handle discussion, repair, nuance, and honest misunderstanding without punishing you for speaking. This boundary is for the pattern that keeps using conversation as a trapdoor. It is for the person who only hears your humanity when it serves them. It is for the dynamics where every explanation becomes fresh ammunition for another round of control. And once you see that clearly, the guilt starts losing its grip. You realize you were not failing to communicate, you were being trained to overfunction. You were carrying the emotional labor of two people while one person kept moving the goalposts. You were trying to solve a problem that required character, not better wording. That is why this boundary feels different when it finally clicks inside your nervous system. It is not a performance of strength, it is the end of needless exposure. You stop trying to look reasonable to unreasonable people who only respect access they can control. You stop offering proof where pattern recognition should already be enough to protect your peace. You stop asking manipulative people to confirm the harm they benefit from causing. And in that moment, your energy comes back home to you instead of feeding chaos. The call ends sooner, the text waits longer, the room feels less dangerous. Their mood stop deciding your worth because your access is no longer automatic. And something quiet but important begins happening inside you, where self-trust starts rebuilding. You start believing your discomfort sooner instead of waiting for perfect evidence. You stop calling yourself dramatic for noticing the pattern beneath the words. You stop negotiating with disrespect just because it arrived wearing a familiar face. That matters with parents, partners, siblings, bosses, friends, and smiling enemies who act helpful publicly. Because manipulation survives by keeping you available long enough to doubt yourself. Your boundary breaks that cycle by ending the contact before the fog thickens. Not every relationship can survive that truth, and that is painful even when necessary. But the ones built on your confusion were never protecting you anyway. They were protecting their comfort, their access, their control, and their image. And once you accept that, silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling clean. Clean like air after smoke. Clear like finally hearing your own mind again. So if you needed one boundary toxic people cannot easily twist, this is it. Do not keep talking after disrespect, and do not apologize for ending access. You are not required to stay available while someone rearranges reality around you. You are allowed to leave the moment your dignity becomes negotiable in someone else's hands. And sometimes the strongest thing you can say is almost nothing at all.